Test, test.
Gordon said he's still in pain.
Should be hard. Test, test. Can you hear me? Test, test. Can you hear that? Test, test. Can you hear that? Can you hear? You can't hear it? Why won't they go in there? Test, test. Can you hear that? Let's see. You can? You can't hear me? Yeah. Well, why are you saying you don't hear me? I think you guys are just being difficult. Donna, I'm a very sensitive person. Very, very sensitive.
Get over it. Liddell. It's going to be a good class, Alex.
Boy, if they paid me better, it'd be worth it, but I don't know. All right, let's get going. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I see some of you managed to deal with daylight savings time. I keep hearing it's going to go away. I'll believe it when I see it, but see how it goes. So.
The other one's going away.
Yeah, the other one's going.
Daylight standard time is going away.
Nah,
Oh.
they haven't. They're arguing it's never going to happen.
John says it's never going to happen. I believe John. So.
It's frustrating, but it's never going to happen.
There was an article in the paper today that the Congress can't decide what's going to do.
The Congress can't decide? Oh, who would have thought? Anyway, it's good to see you all. For those of you out there on Facebook, or what is it, Zoom, it's good to see you. I understand we have a slight delay, but there's some that actually get to see us on YouTube as well. So wherever you are and whoever you are, welcome. Nice to have you here. I'm going to do a little review about Lesson 9 to bring us up to speed. And I did want to close out two areas of Lesson 9 quickly. So it's going to involve you getting your Bibles out. So if you have your Bibles, I want to encourage you to turn over to Exodus chapter 12. And John, I lied. There's 2 verses in 12 and 1 verse in 13. We'll get to that in a minute. But let me bring you up to speed on where we were last week for lesson 9. Today will be lesson 10, obviously. And this is a 13-lesson series, so we've got 3 to go, if I don't scare you off, so we'll see how it goes. First off, lesson 9 review. After the Israelites went over to the far side of the Red Sea and departed or dealt with the Egyptians and so forth, they were on their own, and they were in what's known as the wilderness of Shur. Now, some translations call this the desert of Shur. Has anybody been to the Sinai Peninsula? I'm trying to visualize what this place was like. I did a quick study on Wikipedia there, and it said that even today there's some 600,000 inhabitants of that Sinai Peninsula. It's more or less run by the Egyptians. It's their property, more or less. And but I wonder, what do they mean by wilderness? Have some of you been to Wyoming? Well, there are stretches of Wyoming where they'll actually increase the speed to 80 miles an hour so you can get through there. You know, it's just something else. But one of the things that stands out in my mind about Wyoming is that it's arid, but there is some plant life per se, sagebrush and things of that nature. And before you turn your nose up to sagebrush, please understand that that's a staple of cattle and deer and wildlife. They actually can thrive on sagebrush. And I thought it wouldn't do me any good. I like a little in a nice recipe once in a while, but they literally eat that stuff. And I was wondering if Sinai might have been like that. It still qualifies for wilderness, but is it really desert like the Sahara, which was to the east of Egypt and so forth? Well, if anybody knows, please bring us up to speed. All I do know is that we have somewhere between 1.5 to 2 million Israelites in the desert of Shur. What's going on there? And we'll see more as we go along. Along the way, they came to Marah, and there was bitter water, salty. Marah means salty. And God performed a miracle, or else it was just well-known desalination. We understand that there might be some trees in that area. I say this might because of my limited reading, that can actually take the salt or desalinate salt water. And so the spring that they were drinking from, or the springs they were drinking from, they threw one of these trees literally into the water, and that desalinated the water sufficiently for them to drink. It was also a place of controversy, and we found out that instead of approaching God and said, "Lord, help us," they went to Moses and they quarreled. Now, quarrel is an interesting word. It hides a lot of fact. What does a quarrel involve? Can we agree on argument? Dispute? Disagreement? But what else is in quarrel? Buried in there. We're a nation that's quarreling right now. Our nation. What's buried within quarrel? Anger. And what do we know about anger? Well, you know it when you see it. Did you have something to say, Warren?
Yeah, you talked about bitter waters. You're assuming it's salt water. I always thought it was alkaline water.
Could be. What I saw was salty, but either way.
Well, it's the pH.
He said it could be alkaline. So there we go. Anyway. They went to Moses and they said, "You got us into this. You get us out of this. You go to God and get this straightened out." I mean, there was anger bordering on, later on, some of the quarrels bordered on Moses going to God and said, "Lord, you got to help me here because they're on the verge of stoning me." So, I mean, that's anger. We know it when we see it. Now, some psychologists will tell you that anger is a false emotion, that it's a masking emotion for two things: hurt and disappointment. So, at any rate, they were quarreling with him at Marah. Well, God took care of the matter, put down edicts and so forth, and proceeded to say, all right, we got to get past this. I've got to discipline you. I've got to turn you into a nation of believers. You've come out of this slavery, 12 tribes, and I'd be interested to know if that's all that were with him, and I'll make that point in a minute. But I've got to turn you into a nation, and you've got to start getting your eyes off Moses and getting it on me. And so, more or less, they went along with it, and they went on to this place called Elim. It looks like Elam. I would say that as an Englishman, or an English-speaking person. But they went on to Elim and spent some time there. 12 springs of water, pH factor being 5. And 70 date palms. You ever seen date palms? They go high in the air and they're just beautiful and things to see. I mean, it was an oasis, something right out of, Lawrence of Arabia or something. It was just fantastic. From there, they went on and they went into the wilderness or the desert of sin. Now, I'm not going to make any puns off sin and so forth. You can just take it for what it is. But once again, there was something for them to quarrel about. And this time, it was hunger. Two ways to handle that. Go to the Lord, or ask Moses in a polite way, petition the Lord for us that we may be fed. Nope. You got us into this. You get us out of it. Why did you bring us here? We had pots of food back in Egypt and so forth. I mean, everything that they could grumble about, they were quarreling again. Well, Moses goes to God, and God comes up with this food called manna. And even today, I'd love to see it. I'd be curious to even taste it. It said it tasted like honey wafers. It was like frost that came down. It looked the color of coriander seed, and you could boil it and you could bake it and so forth. And God laid down some stipulations. But within that stipulation, he said, you can pick this 6 days of the week. And on the 6th day, pick enough for 2 days. But don't pick any on the 7th day because I want you to rest. And I'm trying to imagine what this must have been like. Maybe you have the same feelings. We come to church, we read about it, we hear somebody stand up here and talk about like he knows what he's talking about. What's going on and so forth. Mike's back there laughing at me. But it must have been something to be there and to be going through this and trying to figure out what's going on and where do we go from here, and no direction home because home is so far away. We're going to talk about that in a moment. So God institutes the notion of manna, which takes care of their carbohydrates and so forth. But they needed meat, and God provided for that. He says, I'll have manna for you in the morning, and I'll have quail for you in the evening. And there's their protein source. And so they could make foods from this. And away they went. But he also instituted, at least verbally, I don't know if we haven't yet codified it in terms of the 10 Commandments in stone, but we'll hear more about the Sabbath again. But here's the first time where he made it clear. You've been working your buns off for 7 days a week, 24/7. I want you to rest. And that must have caught them completely off guard. But it's like, how do you treat your animals? I don't say they're animals, but how do you treat your pets? You know when they need to be taken care of. And the Lord looked upon them that way. I'm going to turn you into a nation, but I know I can't do this overnight. So there it was. The wilderness of sin. I have to get going here. They moved on to a place called Rehoboam. And once again, it was a matter of water, only this time there wasn't any. Once again, there was grumbling. I started to see a pattern here. And so God told Moses, bring the elders with you this time and come up to the rock at Horeb. Now, we're going to talk about Horeb in a minute. Warren, last time, brought to my mind that Moses had gone to Sinai. I thought he went to Mount Horeb. And I've done some reading on that. Maybe, but most scholars would agree with you. Horeb and Sinai are the same thing, possibly. Now, we'll talk about that in a minute. But there, Moses, who struck the rock as God told him to do, provided the water for them and got them through it again, only this time the elders got to witness it, the whole bit, blah, blah, blah. He named this place Massah for test and Meribah for quarrel. Quarrel. Where is all this anger coming from? I think it has to do with fear and so forth. That would lead him into that. And they're not so different from you and me in that regard. Well, this brings me to two parts that I really want to touch on quickly. One, they find themselves in a war. They find themselves in a war they didn't want. It's a fight. There's a king in the area. I don't know how big his tribe was, but his name is Amalek, and he came out to fight them. Why in the world would he want to fight them? Well, remember all that gold and stuff they brought out of Egypt with them, and they haven't changed it into calves yet and so forth? They probably look like a nice, juicy target with not much of an army. Maybe. So this is where I want to take you back real quickly to chapter 12 and verse 32. If you have your Bibles, do join me. The Israelites journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, and there about 600,000 men on foot besides women and children. Do the math. If there was a wife for each of those women, we're already at 1.2 million. The children could put us anywhere close to 2 million. Do you believe that number? It's a staggering number considering the period and so forth. And I have personally trouble with it. Not that it matters. But it just seems like an incredible number of people to be out there. Yeah. Chapter 12, verse 32. Yes, that's what I said, 37.
We need to fix the mic.
Mine says 32. No. Okay. So anyway, however big that number is, they're out there, right? Huge amount of people. Now, drop down to verse 40. Now, the length of time the Israelite people lived in Egypt was about 430 years. At the end of the 430 years, to the very day, all the Lord's divisions left Egypt. All the Lord's divisions left Egypt. Now, I know that going back to Joseph and so forth, we had 70 people come into Egypt to escape the famine. At least Joseph brought them in and so forth. So I want to put it to you. Can you get close to 2 million people in 430 years based on 70? What's missing here? I mean, that's some big families in 430 years.
Well, look how many people came to the United States 400 years ago, and how many there are now.
True, but we had immigration and so forth throughout the 1800s and so forth. Well, one conjecture from some is that there were more Israelites per se. They weren't of Israel's lineage, but there were more people there in Egypt at the time than just Joseph and his 70. Abraham went to Egypt, right? And some conjecture that maybe this 430 years goes back farther than just Joseph, and that is where this huge population came to be. And I have no idea. I'm not the last word in this. I just put it out there for you to think about because it's not going to determine your salvation. But it is something to think about. Could it be that those people over the course of time were assimilated into the tribes? However you might do that. Something to think about.
What is amazing, though, when you get to Deuteronomy chapter 7, he talks about all these nations, bigger, more powerful than you are. And it talks about the Jebusites as one of those people. The Jebusites lived in Jerusalem. Are you saying there were more people living in Jerusalem than the entire Israelites? You know, some of these numbers are, you kind of wonder.
Yeah, Warner and I share on that. These numbers are staggering. Now, frankly, I could take all of these and divide them by 2 and be a much happier camper about this whole matter, but that's neither here nor there. Just remember that Sinai today has about 600,000 occupants or inhabitants. So I'm just trying to put this all into perspective. Some of those numbers back there are just staggering to me. Well, I want to take you one more place. 1, the size of the population. 2, that in the course of 430 years they left. And finally, over to chapter 13. And I want to pick it up there at verse 17. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. They could have followed the coast and gone straight on into Israel. They didn't. They didn't. For God said, if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt. God knew how frail they were. Which brings up the...
They were on a high. They had just seen the Lord defeat Pharaoh. They had the it's like you score a touchdown before at the end of the second quarter, and then you got the ball to begin the third quarter. You got the momentum.
You got the momentum, but had they fought? So far they've been slaves. Which brings up this whole question, and here we go. Let me go on. It says, so God led the people round by the desert toward the Red Sea, and it goes on to say, the Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. Where did they get their military training? Where'd that come from, slaves? Where did you get that training? Now, I know a little bit about the military, and I know there's several other men in this congregation, probably some women too. You're not trained. They throw you into battle. You're just cannon fodder. You're not going to make it. Chances, unless you're very, very lucky and get smarter with time. Where did they get this military training? I don't have an easy answer for this. All I know is here in verse 5, the Israelites went up out of Egypt armed for battle. They had arms. Where did they get the training? Which brings me back to our current chapter. If we can go back there, John. It says Amalek attacks Israel. And Moses, let's get it here. God, Moses, Joshua, Aaron, and Hur come up with a plan. Now, I know you know who Moses is and Joshua. You know who Aaron is, but how about Hur? Where'd that dude come from? Well, 2 arguments there, and one of them I like, and the other one I don't like. Hur, as much. Hur, they said, was just a friend of the family. Well, okay, so be it. That's fine. I mean, you know, a trusted friend is kind of like Joshua or something like that. Another one says Hur was indeed, now this is rabbinic tradition. You know, all the rabbis got together for this. And they handed down the notion that Hur was the son of Miriam, who was Joseph and Aaron's sister. That would have made Hur the nephew. I can buy into that one much easier. So, you know, and of course we know Hur eventually, through his lineage, we had the movie Ben-Hur, but anyway, that's another matter entirely. Amalek attacks Israel, and they go out to fight him. And that's why I took you back to this verse. I know they were armed. They said, Joshua, go out there. Moses sits on a rock, holds his hands up, her's holding up one arm, Aaron's holding up the other, that miracle, so forth. And as long as his hands were held up, they won, and things of that nature. Would have been very interesting to see, although I suspect I would have been down there in the battle line. Where did they get that military training? All we know is they won. Thank goodness for it. Definitely God was on their side. But I'll give you a shield and a spear, or a shield and a sword. Good luck. I've seen some scenes that are so graphic in fighting, and I've read some of the battles the Romans had with various people, and they're so gruesome. I won't even go into detail. But I just try to imagine what it'd be like to be in a front line in hand-to-hand combat, fighting for your life as well as your nation.
There are several battles that you read about later on in the Old Testament where they had to do almost nothing. The Lord fought the battle for them.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And we have, and I like your faith in the matter. I just point out that when they left Egypt, they were armed, so we know they had some kind of armament, probably back when they were told to plunder the Egyptians, but there it was. All right, so there's the battle. Amalek lost, and he was cursed, and there it is. Now, last part of chapter 9, we'll move on. I better move on quickly, but it's worth talking about, don't you think? I mean, I'm trying to bring these people to life for you people. I don't enjoy just, okay, here's a verse, read that. What do you think? Oh, you know, they're real. They're flesh and blood. They either are or it's all mythology. Now, which one do you believe? Okay. So Jethro comes to visit Moses there in the vicinity of Rehoboam. And he brings Moses' wife and 2 sons. Now, I went back and did some research, and when Moses first left and went back to Egypt, he took her with him and their 2 sons. But eventually, as things got more heated and conflict between him and Pharaoh and so forth, he had her sent back to her father, in this case, Jethro. Now, Jethro was a priest. I don't think he was a priest of some idol god. I think he was a priest of God. But he wasn't, to the best of our knowledge, he wasn't one of the 12 tribes of Israel. So, you know, this goes back to how big is Israel? And you just have to wrestle with that. But, you know, there were believing, participating believers in God who weren't necessarily of the 12 tribes. Melchizedek. Thank you. Melchizedek. Anyway, Jethro is looking at Moses. He's delighted to see his son-in-law, and Moses reveres him and respects him in every way. And they have a meal and so forth. And I'm sure Moses was glad to see his wife and 2 sons and so forth. But at some point along the way, Jethro was watching how Moses was doing his day-to-day business, and he saw that Moses was trying to carry the whole thing on his shoulders. He was making all the decisions. He was settling all the disputes. I mean, anything that was a problem and people came to him, and you can imagine the lines, he was trying to do it himself. And Jethro came up to him and said, I want to give you some advice, and I hope you'll consider it. And Jethro couches it very carefully. He says, if it fits the Lord's will. So he's not saying, this is for me, do it my way. He's saying, I think this is a wiser way to do it, and I believe God this would please God as well. You need to learn to delegate. Now, some of you are in leadership roles, or have been, and you know as well as I do that if you try to carry the whole thing on your own shoulders, you're going to burn out. It's just not going to work. You need to learn to delegate. And so he says, teach the leaders in thousands, in hundreds, in 50s and 10s, you know, have them teach and so forth. Teach them what you would have them know about handling responsibilities. You be my spokesman, and if they have any really serious, difficult challenges that need your judgment, have them bring it to you then. But don't try to do this whole thing for nearly 2 million people. It's stupid. It won't work. Now, he didn't use words like that, but he's saying it's very foolish. Delegate. Okay. So that brings us through chapter 9. Guys, fasten your seatbelts. We're going to fly here. We won't finish this lesson today, and that's all right. I'm okay with it. If we've learned a couple of things along the way, it's fine. I would, since I've already acknowledged we won't finish the lesson, I would welcome your thoughts. Does anybody have any? Out there in Zoom land or otherwise? Anybody want to share a thought?
Well, I think by appointing those men over thousands and fifties and tens, he also gets buy-in from them.
Yes,
So
that's.
it's a good pulling the community together.
I love that. She says they get buy-in as well. Moses gets buy-in because, they're taking some of this responsibility on. It's not just quarreling with him anymore. It's, what did you do first? That's what I'd want to know if I were a leader and you were, subordinate to me for some reason. What did you do? Why are you bringing this to me? What did you do? Now, what's the problem? What do you need from me to make this work? So, there we go.
One other thing on Amalek.
Amalek.
God says, I will utterly just blot out the memory of Amalek. And Saul's first assignment after he became king was to wipe out the Amalekites.
What? Really? I love it. So Warner said, King Saul's first assignment is to wipe out the Amalekites. That's kind of cool. I mean, I'm sorry for him,
He
really.
didn't do it, so he left it for David.
Yeah, well. But anyway, that's curious. All right, so Exodus so far. It covers a variety of things, and we're going to go through this quickly, but see what's happening here, the shaping that's going on. It says, freedom. Boy, we could spend hours on freedom. We like freedom. It's nice to wake up every morning and have freedom to make decisions and so forth. We have the journey to Sinai, which is obviously what we have in mind. We're going to see their sacred calendar, and we're going to talk about the Passover in more detail. They had to eat the unleavened bread because they were leaving in haste and so forth. We're going to see clans united as a nation. Boy, there's a trick. We're also going to see the covenant between God and Israel and the formation of their holy character. Now, all of this is kind of lofty stuff in places, but we're going to try to get into pieces of it because this is an introductory course, and if you want a real scholar, I'm probably not the person for it, but I'll give you as much as I can, and I hope it's useful to you, and if it gets you to go in deeper, then God bless you. Go for it. All right, so here we go. Isaiah goes on to say, this is Isaiah way on down the line, but it comes out of this. All of these things that are going on, all of these events that are going on now in the desert of Sin, and they're quickly approaching the desert of the wilderness of Sinai, says, all of this is going to translate itself into this. I am the Lord. I've called you in righteousness, right living. I want you to be a perfect people. I will also hold you by the hand and watch over you. Boy, I'd love to have God hold me by the hand. Some of you know I need it. And I will appoint you as a covenant to the people, as a light to the nations. All of this is the beginning, taking them towards something even greater than the event. Now, believe it or not, this is probably in the peak time of Israel and so forth, and more is coming, but we know for sure that this isn't going to work. Eventually, this vast nation is going to be whittled down to one or two tribes, mostly Judah and tribe Benjamin. And through that lineage, the Messiah is going to come. So all of this has importance. So while we can turn our nose up and say, well, I'm sure I could have done better, I don't know that I could, it has a purpose. We're going to try the disciplined approach first and see how that was hard for them to do. All right, moving on. Exodus so far. Let's see, did I not do this, or am I going the wrong direction? This is reaching further ahead. In Romans, again, it stems back to where we are, but we see that where we are stems back to this. And listen to it very carefully. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first, Exodus, and also to the Greek, you and me. So here we go. Let's get into chapter 10. Essentially what the author here of this series is saying is that Jewish nation will be a historical stage upon which Christ would appear and complete God's plan of salvation. Well, okay. I imagine for them at the time, they didn't consider themselves to be an historical stage. They considered them to be a desperate people coming out of bondage and trying to get some feeling through leadership and ultimately through God where they're going to go. So when we look at Exodus, the book, we're going to see the commandments. They're going to be articulated first. They're going to be written down by Moses, but eventually they're going to be codified in tablets in terms of the 10 Commandments. And we're going to find out that it's not just the 10 Commandments. There are going to be laws and ordinances that explain those 10 Commandments. Don't you think it's kind of interesting? We'll have something that thou shalt not steal and leave it at that. Oh, what do we mean? Honor thy mother and thy father, that sort of, or father and their mother, that sort of thing. What does that mean, and so forth? So we're going to see some movement in that regard. By the way, just to put this laws and ordinances into perspective, what is a statute? Does anybody know? We have all kinds of statutes. They're laws, but where do they come from? Yes, they're passed by the legislature, Congress. Okay, what's a regulation? That's passed by bodies appointed by Congress to oversee the area to which they have confidence. The FAA, the FDA, you get the idea, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission. I mean, all those various agencies make regulations. As long as the regulations comport with the law, Constitution, so forth, they're felt to be binding. Now, lately we've seen one or two of the agencies challenged. It's usually by disgruntled people who don't want those who know to do it, but there it is. Exodus is also going to talk to us about the manner of worship. The manner of worship. The priestly order and tasks. And boy, I could see some of you glazing over when you hear this sort of thing. It's something else. But we have to appreciate how tight it was, how disciplined it was, and how it was doomed to failure. But God was going to take him through this, realizing that it wasn't just for them, it was for us down the road. We're going to talk about the design and building of the tabernacle, that portable temple, for lack of better terms. We'll talk about holy days and feasts, and we'll talk about the Ark of the Covenant and so forth. In more details, Exodus talks about the departure from Egypt, the covenant and the tabernacle. We talked about that. In later books, I like that song. Ventures. Anyway, sacrificial system, the role of priests. Leviticus will give us more of that. Anybody interested in that, go for it. In Numbers, also written by Moses primarily, we'll talk about genealogies and land laws and wars and all that good stuff. And then lastly, in Deuteronomy, Moses wrote some of this. A summary of their wanderings, a review of laws and ordinance, and Moses' prophecies and blessings and so forth. Now, for some of us, that's arduous. And I'm going to try to keep it as upbeat and move it along as best I can. But there are parts of it we really need to stop and take a look at. So we'll do it in due time. Moving on. Let's talk about this notion of a covenant, because one is coming. They are in the Sinai Desert now. And they're coming towards Mount Sinai, which brings me to Mount Horeb. Some scholars say they don't know where Horeb is. Others say it's one side of Mount Sinai and Sinai is the other side. Still others say, no, they're one and the same. They're one and the same. Interchangeable, no problem. And still others point to Mesopotamia, which said Horeb, to the Mesopotamians, was the mountain of the sun, whereas Sinai was the mountain of the moon. Go figure. Linda, you know, don't you? Yeah, she knows, but she's not telling. Okay. Okay. Which is why when Warren was trying to correct me or at least make me aware last time, I kind of cringed a little because I thought he went to Mount Horeb, to the burning bush and so forth. Well, if they're the same, he went to Sinai. I don't know. I just know that Moses was out in that vicinity and he saw the burning bush with Jethro, on business with Jethro and so forth. This terrain is not new to him. He's been here before. Now he's going back to it. So somewhere in there is truth. But when the smoke clears and we focus and so forth, we understand that they're going to meet God. They're going to meet God. Can you imagine that? Think about it. We worship God through faith. We're longing someday to meet him. They were going to meet him. And so they did. Oh, I need to go back and point this out. A covenant means, yeah, that's fine. A covenant means to cut. And when you think about cutting, don't you think about blood and so forth? It's a blood relationship. It's through sacrifice and so forth. There's going to be promises made, and it says it's going to be recorded and sealed. You're going to do this. You're agreeing to do this. You're buying into this. And so God is going to put it before them. Free will. He's going to put it before them. Do you want a covenant with me? Or do you want to go your own way? I'm letting you call it. Free will. Do you want a relationship with me, God, not me, Alex? Or do you want to go your own way? And they're going to come back. I don't think it was flippant, but at the same time, I'm not sure they completely understood what they were committing themselves to. But nonetheless, somewhere in there, somewhere in that murky part, we understand that, yep, we want this covenant with you because as it is, we're lost. They knew that. They knew that. We're lost. So moving on. Here it is. In the 3rd month, after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt on that very day, they came into the wilderness of Sinai. Some translations say the desert of Sinai. I always think of Wyoming. I don't know why it is. But when I'm out there driving, I always think, it must have been something like this because I think of the livestock and so forth. They couldn't possibly live in the Sahara. And they had oxen and sheep and so forth. There had to be something out there. So I'm thinking the terrain was arid, but not purely sand like the Sahara. That's my view. If somebody knows about Sinai or can bring me something fresh in the future, I'll be glad to share it. They came into the wilderness of Sinai. When they set out from Rehoboam, I hope I'm saying that close, they came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness. Can you imagine all those tents? And camped in the wilderness, and there Israel camped in front of the mountain. They're close, but they're not there. Has anybody ever seen pictures of Sinai? I've seen pictures. Have you ever seen it? It was a beautiful picture. If I can find it, I'm going to make a slide and bring it in and share it with you. But it's a desolate mountain, just desolate. It's not like Pikes Peak. Pikes Peak is beautiful compared to that thing. It's a desolate mountain, but it's there. And that's what they consider it, the mountain of God. So it is. Moses goes up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain. Now, I'm only sharing this one slide with you quickly because I want you to know that it wasn't a one-time affair. Go up, get the tablets, go up again, get the new tablets because you broke the others because you're mad at everybody. He went up there 7 times. 7 times on that mountain. And this doesn't count the burning bush. 7 times. So there must have been something about that mountain. And so we'll read more about it. We don't need to cover all these right now, but if you're interested, it starts in Exodus 19 and it runs down through 34 in terms of his visitations to the mountain. And on 2 of those occasions, he went up there and spent 40 days and 40 nights. What is significant about 40 days and 40 nights? Where have we heard that before? Where? In the wilderness?
The temptation of Christ.
Oh, yeah, temptation. Let's go back further. Further back. The flood. Yeah. Now, that was some rain. But anyway, so it seems to be a sacred number, at least an interesting number. It keeps coming up. It never goes away. 40 days, 40 nights. What would you do for 40 days, 40 nights when you know the Lord is going to give his stones and codify the 10 Commandments? And he already verbally mentioned them to the people in your or through you, but he mentioned them in their presence. Why do you have to be up there 40 days, 40 nights? I don't have an answer for that. But apparently the Lord thought that was important. Was Moses idle the whole time? Was he in prayer the whole time? Was he in adoration the whole time? Or was he writing down some of these books that we have? I just don't know. But there he was, 40 days, 40 nights, twice. All right. We'll use this and we'll stop at this verse. Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians and how I bore you on the eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now then, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, this relationship we're going to have that you're buying into, then you shall be my own possession among the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you will speak to the sons of Israel. Well, that's where we'll stop. That's where we'll go from. Thank you for your attention. Appreciate it. Yes.
There was a monastery up there, St. Catherine's Monastery, and that's where Codex Sinaiticus was found in that monastery.
Can you send me that?
It came from like Wikipedia.
Okay, I'll try to get it.
Just look up down there Wikipedia.